So picture yourself standing on a high mountain ridge in Sicily today. The sun is beating down and you are just surrounded by hikers.
Oh, yeah. And not just any hikers, right?
Right, exactly. Like they're wearing $300 Gore-Tex jackets, moisture-wicking shirts, high-tech boots, the works.
Very serious.
Very serious. And they are paying good money to walk this 60-kilometer four-stage trail through the Nebrodi and Madoni Mountains.
Seeking out what modern tourism guides call psychophysical well-being.
Yeah, psychophysical well-being and like slow tourism. Basically, they are out there to escape the crushing noise and the ego of the modern world.
Which makes sense.
It does. But what is truly wild here is who they are actually imitating. I mean, they are walking in the exact footsteps of an 18th century completely illiterate beggar.
A man who was bullied relentlessly, no less.
Yeah, a guy who wore the exact same scratchy brown robe every single day and, once supposedly served his coworkers ricotta cheese that was miraculously made out of dirty ashes.
It is quite the contrast to the Gore-Tex jackets.
Oh, absolutely. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking the stack of sources you requested for this topic. So we've got historical encyclopedias, Catholic biographies like the Francisco Diary, and even those modern Sicilian tourism guides.
A really interesting mix of materials.
Yeah, and our mission today is to unpack the incredibly bizarre, deeply inspiring life of St. Felix of Nicosia.
And it really is a massive paradox. I mean, we are so conditioned to believe that historical legacy belongs to, the conquerors or the brilliant inventors.
Right, the people who aggressively clawed their way to the very top.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Felix represents the absolute inversion of that. This deep dive is really about how a person can achieve a profound, echoing historical impact through just radical humility.
Like almost unbelievable resilience.
Yes, by aggressively embracing the absolute bottom rung of society.
So to make sense of how an illiterate beggar ends up with a 60-kilometer modern hiking trail named after him, I guess we have to start at the very beginning.
We do.
So put yourself in 18th century Sicily.
And we really need to understand the gravity of that setting. Because, this isn't just some rustic, charming, old world backdrop.
No, not at all.
This is a time and place defined by grinding, brutal poverty. There is zero social safety net. I mean, a bad harvest means literal starvation for these people.
And disease is just rampant everywhere.
Exactly. So for a family at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, survival basically meant mastering a practical income-generating trade the very moment you were physically capable of holding a tool.
Right, which perfectly frames the birth of our subject.
Yeah.
So he was born Filippo Giacomo Amoroso in November 1715.
Into a desperately poor family in the town of Nicosia.
Yeah, and his father actually passed away right around the time he was born, so he didn't have a childhood as we understand it today.
Well, he was thrust immediately into pure survival mode.
Sent to work as a cobbler's apprentice under a man named Giovanni Civarelli.
And you can just imagine the atmosphere of a cobbler's shop in the 1700s. It's loud, it's cramped, and it is a really rough blue-collar environment.
Oh, totally.
The older workers are constantly swearing, shouting, just complaining all day. But from a very young age, Filippo exhibits this intense, almost defensive devotion.
Defensive is actually a really great word for it because the biographies point out that at just 6 years old, he started stuffing his ears with wool.
Wow, at 6.
Yeah. Just physically plugging his ears to block out the foul language of the older workers. Like, he is a deeply sensitive kid actively trying to mute the chaos of the adult world around him.
That is so striking.
And there's this moment in the shop that really hints at what is to come. So one of the older workers accidentally slices his finger open while swearing.
Okay.
And the texts claim young Filippo walks over, dips his finger in his own saliva, rubs it on the wound, and it just miraculously heals on the spot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and apparently after that, the entire culture of the shop changes. Like, the swearing completely stops.
So he fundamentally alters the environment around him without ever raising his voice or, throwing his weight around.
Exactly. But as he grows into a young man, he realizes he doesn't want to just make shoes for the rest of his life.
No.
He is pulled toward a life of complete spiritual devotion.
Right. So at age 20, he applies to join the Capuchin order of friars.
And he hits a massive brick wall.
Oh, a huge one.
He is completely rejected. But it's not a one-time thing. I mean, okay, imagine you are applying for your absolute dream job. You send in your resume, and you get a form letter rejection.
Standard, yeah.
So you apply again and again. For 8 straight years, some sources actually say 10 years of continuous rejection, he keeps knocking on the door.
And they keep turning him away.
Yeah, and he just keeps showing up at the lobby the next morning with a smile. I mean, why on earth were they shutting him out for a decade?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the Capuchins were operating on pure, harsh pragmatism. It wasn't about his faith. There were basically 2 major strikes against him.
Okay, what was the first one?
First, he was completely illiterate. And in the structure of the Catholic Church at that time, if you couldn't read Latin, you couldn't be ordained as a priest or a cleric. You could only ever be a lay brother.
Let's clarify that distinction for a second, because I think it's crucial to his story. What does a lay brother actually do compared to a cleric?
Right, so a cleric is the educated class of the monastery. They study theology, they celebrate the Mass, they hear confessions, and they basically hold the positions of authority.
So they're management, essentially.
Pretty much. A lay brother, on the other hand, is the blue-collar workforce of the friary. They do the manual labor. So they cook, they sweep the floors, tend the gardens, and they go out into the streets to beg for the community's food.
Oh, I see.
They still take the vows, but they are definitively lower in the monastic hierarchy.
So the authorities knew he could only ever be a laborer, but what was the second strike against him?
The second strike was his family situation. His family was destitute, and his mother relied entirely on his income as a shoemaker just to put food on the table.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the Capuchin authorities looked at him and determined that accepting him would mean actively depriving a starving widow of her only breadwinner.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
They refused to let him abandon his earthly responsibilities just to pursue his own spiritual goals.
So they forced him to live out his charity at home first.
Exactly.
And it wasn't until both of his parents had passed away that the door finally opened. He was accepted into the novitiate at age 28, and that's when he takes the name Brother Felix.
Right, and 28 was relatively late in life back then to completely start over.
Yeah, but he finally gets to escape his old world and join the friary.
Well, he joins the friary, but he doesn't exactly escape his old world.
Wait, what do you mean?
The Capuchin superiors do something highly unorthodox here. Normally, when someone joins a religious order, they are shipped off to a friary far away from their hometown.
Yeah, that's what I would assume.
Because the philosophy is that you need a clean break from your past. You shouldn't be distracted by your old friends, your family, or just your former life in general.
Hold on, so if the whole point of joining a monastery is to leave the world behind, sending him back to Nicosia seems like a terrible idea.
It does seem that way.
It's like getting a massive life-changing promotion, but the catch is, you have to do your new job out of your childhood bedroom while your old drinking buddies are just watching you through the window. It's an incredibly awkward dynamic.
It is, but it was a very deliberate test.
Really?
Yes. The authorities recognized something unusual in Felix. They saw that his level of internal detachment was so absolute that the normal geographical rules just didn't apply to him.
That's fascinating.
They believed he could live among the very people who had known him as a poor, illiterate cobbler and remain entirely undisturbed by their opinions of him. Like he could be physically in his hometown without being spiritually of it.
So they assigned him the role of Questor.
Right.
And his entire job is to roam the region, just walking from house to house, knocking on doors to beg for alms and food to support the other friars.
He is literally begging from the people who used to buy shoes from him.
That is wild. But he embraces this completely. He starts referring to himself as the friary's little donkey, which in the local Sicilian dialect is Usicaradu.
Yes, and the region eventually gets to know him as the heroic saddlebag.
Which is such a great nickname.
It really is. And this role of Questor is where we see his illiteracy actually transform from a liability into a massive strategic advantage.
How so?
Well, the Capuchins were meant to minister to the poorest classes.
Yeah.
A highly educated cleric might try to explain theology using these complex Latin concepts.
Which would just fly right over the heads of desperately poor, illiterate farmers.
Exactly. But Felix couldn't do that. He had to communicate visually and practically.
Oh, right. The sources have this brilliant detail about how he taught the catechism to the local children.
I love this part.
Yeah, he would use whatever he had in his pockets while he was out begging, so he'd pull out a walnut and say, "Look, one nut. There is only one God."
So simple, but effective.
Then he'd pull out 3 nuts to explain the concept of the Holy Trinity. Or he'd count out 10 chickpeas on a table to teach them the 10 Commandments.
What's fascinating here is that it is brilliant communication design for the 18th century.
It really is.
He used the very crops These people spent their entire lives harvesting to explain the mysteries of the universe.
He spoke their language perfectly.
Because he was one of them. He connected with everyday Sicilians in a way that an intellectual theologian simply never could have.
So he is out there doing this grueling physical labor, walking miles every single day on rough terrain, carrying a heavy sack, knocking on doors.
And it wasn't always friendly.
No, sometimes people don't want to give him alms, right? They yell at him, they manhandle him, and whenever he got roughed up, his only response was a phrase he would use for the rest of his life. Let it be for the love of God.
Such incredible patience.
But the physical toll of begging in the streets was actually nothing compared to what was waiting for him back inside the friary.
Yeah, the story takes a very sharp turn here. It moves from physical endurance to extreme psychological endurance.
Yeah, inside the walls of the friary, Felix was placed under the authority of a superior and spiritual director named Brother Macario.
And for decades, the sources actually estimate between 23 and 33 years, Macario subjected Felix to relentless, calculated severity.
This part of the deep dive is where things get genuinely shocking to me. The texts refer to it as fantastic humiliations.
That's the exact phrase they use.
Right. Macario constantly berated him in front of the others, calling him lazy bones, a hypocrite, a people cheater.
And it got so much worse than name-calling.
Yeah, there is one specific incident that just blew my mind. Macario forced Felix to dress up as a carnival jester. He made him stand in the middle of the dining hall in front of all the other friars and ordered him to serve their meal out of a wicker basket. But the basket was filled with a paste made of dirty ashes.
Hard to even picture.
Whoa, stop. I have to push back on this, because if you or I were working in an office today and our boss forced us to wear a clown suit and serve garbage to our coworkers while calling us hypocrites,
You'd call HR immediately.
we would immediately file a massive lawsuit for a hostile work environment. Why on earth would someone endure decades of this kind of abuse and view it as something holy?
It is a completely jarring concept for the modern mind, absolutely, because today we are hyper-focused on self-esteem and boundaries.
Right.
But to understand what was happening between Macario and Felix, we have to step inside the 18th century ascetic worldview.
Okay, unpack that for me.
In that specific monastic culture, human pride, the ego, was viewed as the ultimate poison. It was seen as the absolute greatest barrier between a human soul and God.
So from Macario's perspective, he wasn't just being a bully. He thought he was performing, like, spiritual surgery.
Precisely. Superiors often viewed it as their heavy, sacred duty to violently break the pride of their subordinates. You can think of it kind of like chemotherapy for the soul. The treatment is incredibly toxic and painful, but the goal is to eradicate the cancer of the ego before it kills the patient.
Okay, I can see how Macario justified it to himself. But how did Felix survive it psychologically for 30 years without just snapping?
Because Felix didn't view himself as a passive victim in this dynamic, he actively utilized Macario's abuse as a tool.
Really? How so?
Well, think of the ego like a fire. A fire needs oxygen to burn. And for the ego, that oxygen is the desire for respect, the desire for fairness, the need to be seen as competent.
Okay, I'm with you.
When Macario humiliated him, Felix responded with his phrase, "Let it be for the love of God." By accepting the humiliation completely, he sucked all the oxygen out of the room.
Oh, wow.
He removed his own desire for respect. And when you don't care about being respected, the fire just goes out. The humiliation instantly suffocates.
That is incredible mechanical logic. It's like psychological judo. He just let the momentum of the insult pass right over him. He embraced the absolute lowest position possible, the jester serving ashes, so completely that Macario physically couldn't push him any lower.
He found total invulnerability by just surrendering the nod to defend himself.
And according to the tradition, his surrender was so complete that it basically bent reality. Because when he reached into that wicker basket of ashes to serve the friars, the ashes miraculously turned into fresh, costly ricotta cheese.
And that miracle in the dining hall is actually a perfect bridge to the next phase of his life.
How do you mean?
Because this intense internal war against his own ego eventually overflowed into the external world. His radical humility wasn't just a personal exercise anymore. It began to physically affect the environment and the people around him.
Right, because the biographies document widespread claims of bilocation, which is being seen in 2 places at once and levitating during intense prayer before the Blessed Sacrament.
And most importantly, he became a renowned healer.
I want to pause on the miracles for a second because it's easy for us today to hear bilocation and healing and just write it off as, religious folklore.
Sure.
But why were these specific phenomena so vital to the people of 18th century Sicily?
We have to look back at that socioeconomic reality we established earlier. These impoverished farmers had no access to modern medicine.
None at all.
There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no social safety nets. So when a mysterious fever swept through a village or a drought dried up the cisterns, it meant certain death or starvation.
It was game over.
Exactly. For these people, a miracle wasn't just a fascinating magic trick. It was their only healthcare plan. It was their only disaster relief.
That really puts it in perspective.
Yeah, the claims of Felix healing the sick provided an immense, tangible utility to a desperate population.
And the method he used to perform these healings is endlessly fascinating, especially considering his background. He carried around these items called police.
Yes, the police.
They were small strips of paper printed with invocations to the Virgin Mary, written in Latin and Sicilian. And he would throw these strips of paper into blazing fires to extinguish them.
Or drop them into bone-dry cisterns, and water would supposedly spring up.
Right. And he would place them on the sick, and they would recover.
But the profound irony here is the mechanism of the miracle itself.
Oh, because he couldn't read them.
Exactly. He is wielding the written word with absolute unshakable confidence, yet he cannot read a single letter on the paper he is holding.
It's incredible.
He is entirely blind to the text itself, operating purely on faith in what the text represents.
And this absolute faith was put to the ultimate test in March 1777.
A very dark time for the region.
Yeah, a malignant, highly contagious epidemic strikes the nearby town of Cerami, and Felix is over 60 years old at this point.
Which was quite old for that era.
Right. Human instinct says you run away from a plague, especially when you're a senior citizen. But Felix doesn't run. He marches directly into the hot zone.
He just goes right in.
He works day and night, tending to the infected, and he somehow survives it, saving countless lives in the process. It proves that his particular brand of spirituality wasn't just about sitting quietly in a chapel floating off the ground.
No, it was about rolling up his sleeves and wading into the misery when disaster struck.
Yeah, but he outlived that epidemic by a decade, and an aging body eventually fails. In May 1787, at the age of 71, he is working in the friary garden when he is struck by a sudden, raging fever.
And this is where we see the final culmination of his obedience.
Yes. They bring a doctor in, and the doctor tries to prescribe medicines, but Felix just waves him off. He knows his body. He tells the doctor not to bother, calmly accepting that this is his final illness.
He was completely at peace with it.
And here is the detail in the sources that genuinely made me stop reading and just stare at the wall for a minute. His devotion to the monastic vow of obedience was so deeply ingrained, so extreme, that as he lay dying, he literally requested permission from his superior to pass away.
Yeah, he actually asked 3 separate times.
3 times.
The superior finally gave him the formal blessing and the permission. And only then did Felix bow his head, utter his lifelong phrase, "Let it be for the love of God," and take his last breath at 2 o'clock in the morning on May 31st.
I am still wrestling with this. Is this the most terrifying thing you've ever heard or the most beautiful?
It's a lot to process.
Think about it. Giving someone else the authority over your final breath, is that the ultimate tragic loss of free will? Or is it the ultimate flex of spiritual control?
What's fascinating here is how it fundamentally challenges our modern obsession with autonomy.
Right.
Today, the highest cultural goal is to be the absolute master of your own fate, right up to the bitter end. But for Felix, obedience wasn't subjugation. It was the purest mechanism of love.
Wow.
By choosing to hand over the timing of his death to the authority of his superior, he completely neutralized the terror of dying.
It's that psychological judo again. Death isn't creeping up and stealing his life against his will. He is consciously, obediently giving his life away before death can even take it.
Yes, he completely flipped the power dynamic.
That is just a stunning display of control, brilliantly disguised as total surrender.
And it's this exact philosophy that explains why the sources we're reviewing today aren't just dusty encyclopedias, but modern tourism guides.
Right, because his legacy has physically manifested in the real world today. He was beatified in 1888 and canonized as a saint in 2005 by Pope Benedict XVI.
And now we have the trail.
Yeah, the Way of St. Felix of Nicosia is this heavily traveled 60-kilometer hiking trail. People are strapping on high-tech gear and paying to walk through the mountains, tracing the ancient horseback pilgrimage route of the faithful.
It is quite the phenomenon.
But why does an illiterate friar who referred to himself as a donkey suddenly appeal to burnt-out tech workers and tourists looking for wellness in the 21st century?
Because Felix represents the ultimate antidote to modern exhaustion.
I like that, the antidote.
Think about the psychological weight we carry today. We live in an era defined by extreme information overload. We are constantly pressured to build our personal brand, to argue our opinions online.
To fiercely defend our egos at all times.
Exactly, and to optimize every single second of our lives for status and comfort. It is just exhausting to constantly be the main character of your own life.
We're all kind of suffocating under the weight of our own importance.
And then you look at Felix, a man who actively wanted to be a nobody. When hikers walk his 60-kilometer trail today, they are physically acting out his ethos, whether they realize it or not.
Oh, that's a great point.
You strip away the noise of the city. You carry only what you need in your backpack, which is, your own version of the heroic saddlebag.
Yeah.
You endure the blisters and the physical discomfort of the dirt path, and you are forced to find profound joy in the absolute simplest actions. Just a sip of cold water, the shade of a tree, putting one foot in front of the other.
Walking that trail is basically the modern equivalent of a 6-year-old Filippo stuffing wool into his ears to block out the chaotic, angry noise of the cobbler's shop.
It really is.
It just brings the entire incredible arc of his life into focus. From a rejected, illiterate shoemaker's apprentice, to a bullied friar serving ashes in a jester suit, to a saint who literally moves people across mountains today.
It's an amazing journey.
It is a striking reminder that leaving a legacy doesn't require a massive platform, a prestigious degree, or some fancy title. It requires doing the small, often unseen things with immense, extraordinary care.
And that actually leads me to a final thought. Based on the sources, something for everyone listening to really mull over.
Okay, what is it?
Think back to the printed strips of paper Felix handed out to heal the sick. He distributed those words, yet he couldn't read a single letter of them.
Right, the illiteracy aspect.
We often view his illiteracy as a tragic handicap, but consider the possibility that it was actually a protective shield.
A shield, how?
Well, in an 18th century world where religion and philosophy were endlessly debated in elite intellectual circles, his inability to read the text forced him to simply live it.
Oh, wow.
He didn't have the luxury of overanalyzing the theoretical theology of charity. He just had to carry the heavy bag of food to the hungry.
He just had to do the work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So look at your own life. How often do you get so bogged down in reading, analyzing, and debating the text of your goals, whether that's reading 10 books on fitness instead of actually going to the gym, or endlessly discussing how to be a good partner, that you completely forget to actually live those actions out in the real world?
If you are constantly reading the manual, you are never actually building the thing.
Exactly.
What an incredible question to walk away with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the life of St. Felix. Keep seeking out the extraordinary in the ordinary. And remember, sometimes the people who spend their lives trying to be the smallest are the ones who end up leaving the biggest footprints behind. Catch you next time.